Hello, friends, and welcome to the Diabetes Pro Tip series from the Juicebox Podcast. These episodes have been remastered for better sound quality by Rob at Wrong Way Recording. When you need it done right, you choose Wrong Way. WrongWayRecording.com. Initially imagined by me as a 10-part series, the Diabetes Pro Tip series has grown to 26 episodes. These episodes now exist in your audio player between episode 1000 and episode 1025. They are also available online at diabetesprotip.com and juiceboxpodcast.com. This series features myself and Jennifer Smith. Jenny is a CDE and a Type 1 for over 35 years. This series was my attempt to bring together the management ideas found within the podcast in a way that would make it digestible and revisitable. It has been so incredibly popular that these 26 episodes are responsible for well over 500,000 downloads within the Juicebox Podcast. While you're listening, please remember that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by Ascensia Diabetes, makers of the Contour Next Gen blood glucose meter. And they have an amazing offer for you. Right now, at my link only, contournext.com/juicebox free meter, you can get an absolutely free Contour Next Gen starter kit. That's contournext.com/juicebox free meter. While supplies last, U.S. residents only. The Remastered Diabetes Pro Tip series from the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by Touched by Type 1. See all of the good work they're doing for people living with Type 1 diabetes at touchedbytype1.org and on their Instagram and Facebook pages. This show is sponsored today by the glucagon that my daughter carries, Gvoke HypoPen. Find out more at gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. Good and fresh. Because
so. I'm not going to sing. I don't sing.
No, because this episode is going to be basically me going, and you saying a lot of different things. So okay. I want to, if I can, do a pro tip episode about pregnancy. And I mean like pre-planning, leading up to it, what to expect, how to prepare, what to do, what's going to happen. If this happens, what do I do? And if we can, how do I do it without a glucose monitor? Is that all doable in the next hour?
I never thought about doing it without a glucose monitor. All
right, well, let's do the with.
You mean without a continuous monitor?
Without a continuous.
Not physically without knowing anything.
Not without a meter.
I don't know that that's possible.
Isn't it funny? I call them glucose monitors or blood glucose monitor. Why do I do that? I don't know. Anyway, without a CGM.
Gotcha.
Okay. Because I would like to, I want to do that as well. So anyway, I'm going to be on the outside looking in here for this, but I do think that the place to start, if you agree, is understanding what the pre-planning is like, because you can't, or you shouldn't, I'm guessing, if you have type 1 diabetes, if you're the lady, you should not just, if you can help it, be in a situation where we got bored on Friday and now we're going to have a kid. Right. There should be some more planning than that. So how far out does the planning have to be? And is that maybe person to person and based on their situation?
Yeah. And kind of like we always talk, it is sort of person to person. Overall, if you've all along had pretty good management, you've put lots of the into play and you know how your insulin works, you know how food and activity and all of those things work for you, maybe 3 months.
Okay.
Maybe you get married and it's a quick turnaround and you're like, yeah, we're ready. And like you have everything in place and, you're where it should be. And I mean, there are other parameters to check too, especially with diabetes, things like thyroid.
Mm-hmm.
All of those things should definitely be checked and analyzed and evaluated prior. But everything checks out. Great. If not, then yes, it could be 3 months. It could be 6 months. It could, if you're somebody who's starting out and you know that you and your partner really want to have a child, but you don't really have things in place to do that safely from a discussion maybe that you've had with your doctor or your OB team or whoever, then it might take a long time. I think it takes going back to really like the pro tips episodes, really.
Yeah.
If you're trying to get things contained, that's the starting place, because while you know where you need to maybe get, or maybe you don't, glucose target range for pregnancy should really be started prior to conception, because then it's not such a big changeover from saying, okay, well, I've been aiming for a target of 80 to 180, let's say, right? Well, pregnancy target is, fasting 65 to 95. That's when you wake up in the morning.
Is that
right?
Is that an A1C in the 4s? Is that high 4s?
Gosh, I have to look for the A1C listing,
because
to see exactly where that is.
What I think what we're talking about here is that you have to know how to manage your blood sugars tightly and see some consistency through weeks and months, so that it's not just a fluke. Like 1 month, you're just like, oh, I did it. And you have to be able to do it without low blood sugars that are going to be dangerous for you or the baby too.
Right.
And so, get it right and then prove it.
Correct.
Over and over again.
Over again.
Through your period, through different meals, because you also could. I just finished what I really enjoyed. I haven't, I did a 4-part series with a pregnant person who has type 1. And we interviewed together after her first trimester, after her second, after her third, and just yesterday when her baby is 3 months old. And so I went through the whole process with her to try to understand it. And her A1C was like 4.8 during her pregnancy. And she was describing needing insulin more than double than what she normally needed. And that, like, swallowing that pill of like, oh my God, there's way more insulin needed here. I have to do it. And I want to get to all that. But yeah, to me, what you're saying is, you can't be a person who's got an A1C of 9 and say, I'm going to have a baby. I'll just get pregnant now and I'll fix it. Because what could those things lead to? Like, what do high A1Cs in pregnancy lead to?
So that's where the typical national standard is A1C less than 7% at conception.
Okay.
Right? That's the broad goal. And we aim for a little tighter than that, because as you're kind of getting to, it's easier to have things tighter to begin with. Oh goodness, I've not really done anything, or I didn't plan it, and I also haven't done anything, and now I really have to tighten everything up. That's a lot of change all at one time, along with a load of hormones impacting things at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's a lot, right? So the standard for at conception is really because what they've seen in research is the risks of things like early miscarriage, or many of the genetic problems that can come up from those early weeks of forming all of the different body all of the different body organs and everything. That's what's happening in that first trimester.
Okay.
So the goal being under 7%, your risk is about even with the general population who doesn't have diabetes for those same types of problems to happen.
Okay.
All
right. I understand.
Higher the A1C, the more potential for early loss or miscarriage, the more potential for the heart to not form the right way, or any of the organ systems, a lot of those genetic types of things. Then also a lot of things that are not specifically genetic, like they don't come from down the gene line, but they just happen because glucose levels aren't allowing the cells to divide and form into what they're supposed to do.
So anywhere from a miscarriage to birth defects.
Correct.
Okay. And is it a mortal lock that's going to happen? Or, I mean, you know how some people are like, I smoked all through my pregnancy and he's fine. Like that, are there dumb luck people? And not that I'm saying roll the dice on that, but or are you definitely going to see something, or maybe not even know? Like, is it possible, is it out of this world to think that you could have a high A1C and your child could develop asthma, and that even though you're never going to know, it could have something to do with that. I guess that would be speculative, but
it is. It's complete speculation because there's a lot of research done on later outcomes in kids who've, I guess, born from women who've had diabetes, right, through pregnancy. But a lot of it is more assumption of putting information together,
you're never
right?
going to really know.
You're never really going to know. And, on the opposite of that, let's say you did plan to really take care, and make changes. And, things do happen. People get pregnant and it happens.
Well, I've seen it happen personally.
Yes.
Yes.
There you go.
No one's planning on it. And the next thing you know, you're moving to a place with more space.
Because you're going to need it. Because there's going to be another person there.
Someone by mistake got knocked up because, long day, everybody missed each other. And the next thing you know, I got to leave my condo. That's all I'm saying.
Right. There you go.
I love that condo. Never mind.
So you know that it happens, right?
Yeah.
And and I've worked with a number of women through pregnancy who that has been the case while they were planning events. Really right now, and A1C really was not where we would aim to have it be. And the highest I've had someone start a pregnancy, which was really not planned. It was a teen pregnancy.
Right.
Was 11.3.
Wow. And now did they come to you right away? And no, it took too long.
They didn't. They came in early second trimester. They had gotten through their first trimester with OB team and some endocrine. I can't even remember how the family found integrated to, get in contact and get. But I worked with her through her whole entire pregnancy, and we pretty quickly got her A1C down.
Yeah.
And then, by the end of pregnancy, her A1C was 5.7.
Wow. That's great.
So, and she's a beautiful little kid now that there are no. So can things be okay? Yes, they can. But the risk increases dramatically as the A1C and the glucose levels are not managed.
Yeah. For me personally, and given that you can get pregnant by, not on purpose.
By breathing on someone, right? No.
Hey, that's what I was told. But I think what we're saying is that, say you live in a nice, safe town, you don't really need to lock your door, but you do anyway. There are certain steps you take just because why would we take the risk if we don't need to? Like if we know we're going to have a baby, why would we start with a 7A1C and go, I bet I can get it down before something weird happens to the kid? Let's not do that if we don't need to. But if we get caught in that situation, then, figure it out, get it down. It's correct. It really is. It's I don't know. I'm thinking back now to the conversation I had that the person who I mentioned from the 4 different interviews through the pregnancy came to my attention because her first pregnancy ended in a miscarriage.
Right.
And I've been contacted by people who, there's a person I'm still hoping to get on the podcast. She found out that she had diabetes because she was pregnant. Like she got pregnant, they ran a blood test and they were like, oh, you're not just pregnant, you have type 1 diabetes. And she did not know prior to that. That person's doing terrific, has a really cute kid. And I'm hoping to have her on one day. But anyway, it's just.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to mention here too, is that all the things that you can do ahead of time, sometimes things do happen anyway. Right. I'm actually, my personal is my first pregnancy. I had a miscarriage. So, and I did everything ahead of time. I had been doing everything for several years. We're like, yes, we're like finally ready to definitely have a child. Right. And I had done everything. And in fact, my maternal fetal medicine, which is a high risk OB doctor, that typically manages through high risk pregnancies. She was like, this has nothing to do with you. She said many, many early pregnancies. In fact, she said many women, they're a bit late, especially if they've been pretty regular. They're a little late in their period starting. And then it starts like 5-7 days late and they're kind of wondering. She said, oftentimes those are very where the body actually didn't even start up anything truly. Many miscarriages in terms of a person without diabetes and a person with diabetes who has managed well, they're just because the body knows that there's not something quite right.
Yeah, it just feels like a false start, and that's what happens. Oh, that's really...
And it's sad.
No, of course.
Yeah, and so, it's sad in any regard, but I think if you can do the things ahead of time to prevent it, then you know that you've done everything possible.
Well,
right?
It also takes away from the idea of, is this diabetes or is this something else, so that you can see yourself as more than having type 1. So you can see normal things that happen to people. I just saw someone recently who had a seizure and thought it was because of their blood sugar, but then figured out it wasn't. But that was their first thought was, my blood sugar must have gotten very low, and it turned out not to be. Yeah, you need to see yourself aside of diabetes. And the best way to do that is to make diabetes a lesser impact on you, so that you're not always worried about, is this happening because of that?
Right. And I think that that's a good point, though, for the preconception, the pre-planning stage, to know the impact of this versus, I do this activity and this happens. There's a lot that goes into that beyond just having well-managed blood sugars.
Yeah.
There are a lot of other things to consider in that, right? Nutrition is one of them, So, and then the other factors that are very or autoimmune disorder is, are your other autoimmune conditions, if you do have them, are they well controlled?
Right.
Thyroid is another very big one that's really, really important to have tightly managed prior to conception, because thyroid levels do change, and they will manage and evaluate and do more blood tests and adjust your medication. But you also have to have kind of a baseline,
right,
to know coming in, yes, things are good.
It's funny you mentioned that, because just an hour ago, I took Arden to get her blood test, because we've been managing her thyroid through her endo forever, but it's always just like, well, she's in range, it's fine, except Arden was still having a lot of, side effects of what you would consider hypothyroidism. And so I finally found an endocrinologist who doesn't care exactly what the number says. They care about how you feel. And so she's doing all these other things with her. And I hope to have that doctor on at some point when this process is done with Arden. But it's fascinating. She's taking, so Arden uses Tirosint, and the amount of Tirosint that her first doctor had her on is half of what the second doctor had her on. And she looked and she said, yes, her number's fine, but her symptoms are terrible. And she said, given her weight, I would think that this should be more medication. So she's very tuned into it. I just think that I would like to do a lot more about thyroid on the podcast. You have to find the right people to talk to, and they're difficult to locate, Yeah. But yeah, so that as well. So what do? And I don't want to skip over what Jenny just said about nutrition too. Don't get so focused on your blood sugars that you're like, wow, look at me. I've got a 4.8. I can eat all the Twinkies I want. I learned how to keep my blood. The kid's going to need some greens and protein and stuff like that to grow with. But I don't want to tell you how to plan your family. What I am wondering is, I've decided I've got some money. I found a space I can put the kid, knives, a safe closet if I want to go out, maybe where he can't get hurt, and moving forward, do I make with the bang bang fun part, or do I go find a doctor first? What's first?
The other part of it is not only your management, having a team in place prior to conception is really, really important. Because I've had a number of women that I've worked with who have thought that they would just go with who was preferred with their insurance, plan. And a number of them have transitioned once or even twice through pregnancy because they were so unhappy with the care that they were receiving. A lot of it specific to diabetes and the consideration of diabetes in the pregnancy. And definitely high risk maternal fetal medicine teams, they know pregnancy. But it really takes the right team to know pregnancy and diabetes together. And pregnancy and diabetes with type 1 diabetes is very different than diabetes. And so if you've got a practitioner who, says yes, or you call and you ask around to a couple of offices, talk to their nurses and get a bit of an idea about how the, clinic runs and how appointments run and the doctor and experience. And, we've got lots and lots of experience with diabetes. Diabetes is the question you should be asking, because they may have a good amount of gestational diabetes management experience. It's very different with type 1.
You don't want to get caught in the medical equivalent of, my aunt has that. Yeah.
Correct.
Right. No,
Correct.
I have type 1. Your aunt has type 2. It's different. Thanks for, yeah.
So do your shopping is really, the case. The other piece when you're doing your shopping essentially for your care team is if you've got a really great endo that you're working with already, that would be a first stop to actually ask them, are you going to be my diabetes backup manager through this pregnancy?
Right.
Because I've had some endos who defer to the maternal fetal medicine team, which that's okay as long as the maternal fetal medicine team has got it.
Yeah, and they understand the diabetes piece as
well. And
they
understand the diabetes piece as well. Right. I've also, teams differ. Some OBs, once you get pregnant with high risk anything, they're hands off. They're like, you're going to high risk. High risk is going to manage the pregnancy for you.
And I'll come catch the baby. Yeah.
Right. We won't see you until baby is born and you are post-delivery time. Right. Other teams, the OB sees you for the basic visits, just for the monitoring and that kind of stuff. You'll be shuttled away to maternal fetal medicine, potentially then for the high risk types of things, anatomy scans, fetal heart echoes, all of the higher risk types of evaluations, especially in the third trimester.
Right.
So it around. It pays to even see if offices have a preconception consultation that they will do. So you can talk to the doctor and you can bring them, this is how I manage. I'm well managed. This is what I've done to get to the point of being ready. Because the more that any team like that, what you know and how well you're doing, the more comfortable they're going to be helping you to manage the right way.
Yeah.
So it takes looking.
Okay. So we have to do some shopping. We find the doctor. We decide to move forward. We start doing what we're doing. I end up pregnant. I don't know why
Hopefully
I didn't say you in this scenario.
Hopefully you don't.
Just pretend I'm a lady for a second. I'm pregnant now and I have diabetes. So pretend everything about me is different. I'm a lady. I have diabetes. I'm pregnant now. How soon do I start noticing? Will I notice in my blood sugars before I notice in my pregnancy test?
For the most part, in the first several weeks post-conception, blood sugars are going to start to look wonky. Wonky, and I think the easiest way to describe it is if has experienced a rise of any kind in blood sugar during their normal monthly cycle, whether it's the 3 to 5 days before or the couple days of once they get it, or even around ovulation, hormones from the start of pregnancy are significant. A big difference in blood sugar. Most women in about the first week to, let's call it 5 to 6 weeks, will experience a rise in their insulin need because of those hormones and the impact that they have.
Okay.
So, if you have been trying, that you've been trying, as soon as you know you're done trying, get on these are my diabetes pregnancy targets that I'm aiming for. Okay. If you haven't been doing it, so tightly prior to trying, then definitely do it as soon as you're done trying. So let's you could be pregnant.
All right, let's take a detour for a second and let Jenny rant for a minute. Why? This might be something I know about her that she's never said here, but why are there different ideas of health for pregnant people with type 1 diabetes and non-pregnant people with type 1 diabetes? If it's great for the baby, isn't it great for all of us?
There you go. Okay. Yes. It opens up a whole can of worms. Pandora's box, so to speak.
We have an hour. The Remastered Diabetes Pro Tip series is sponsored by Ascensia Diabetes, makers of the Contour Next Gen Blood Glucose Meter and they have a unique offer just for listeners of the Juicebox Podcast. If you're new to Contour, you can get a free Contour Next Gen Starter Kit by visiting this special link, contournext.com/juicebox free meter. When you use my link, you're going to get the same accurate meter that my daughter carries. contournext.com/juicebox free meter. Head there right now and get yourself the starter kit. This free kit includes the Contour Next Gen meter, 10 test strips, 10 lancets, a lancing device, control solution, and a carry case. But most importantly, it includes an incredibly accurate and easy to use blood glucose meter. This Contour meter has a bright light for nighttime viewing, an easy to read screen. It fits well in your hand and features second chance sampling, which can help you to avoid wasting strips. Every one of you has a blood glucose meter. You deserve an accurate one. contournext.com/juicebox free meter to get your absolutely free Contour Next Gen starter kit sent right to your door. When it's time to get more strips, you can use my link and save time and money buying your Contour Next products from the convenience of your home. It's completely possible that you will pay less out of pocket in cash for your Contour strips than you're paying now through your insurance. contournext.com/juicebox free meter. Go get yourself a free starter kit. While supplies last, U.S. residents only. Touched by Type 1 has a wide array of resources and programs for people living with type 1 diabetes. When you visit touchedbytype1.org, go up to the top of the page where it says Programs. There you're going to see all of the terrific things that Touched by Type 1 is doing. And I mean, it's a lot. Type 1 at school, the D-Box program, Golfing for Diabetes, Dancing for Diabetes, which is a terrific program. You just click on that to check that out. Bowl for a Cause, their awareness campaigns, and the annual conference that I've spoken at a number of years in a row. It's just amazing, just like Touched by Type 1. Touchedbytype1.org, or find them on Facebook and Instagram. Links in the show notes. Links at juiceboxpodcast.com to Touched by Type 1 and the other great sponsors that are supporting the remastering of the Diabetes Pro Tip series. Touchedbytype1.org. When you have diabetes and use insulin, low blood sugar can happen when you don't expect it. Gvoke HypoPen is a ready-to-use glucagon option that can treat very low blood sugar in adults and kids with diabetes ages 2 and above. Find out more. Go to gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. Gvoke shouldn't be used in patients with pheochromocytoma or insulinoma. Visit gvokeglucagon.com/risk.
It's a great question. And it's one that's always kind of been like in the back of my mind, even before my husband and I, it's like, we definitely want to have a child within the next year, right? But I had already, prior to that readiness, I had already been focusing on much tighter targets than my endo ever told me to aim for. Knowing what I know, the research that I've done about long-term outcomes of blood sugar management and control, right? And it was several years ago, actually, that I worked with a woman through her pregnancy and postpartum. She said to me, so my doctor wants me to loosen up my targets. And she's like, now I'm through pregnancy managing the way that I did and knowing what people without diabetes, what their body manages for them.
Yeah.
She's like, why would I go back to loosened targets?
Right.
Why would I do that? And it really like brought it to the front of my head from like of that's what I always aim for. So I guess I didn't really think about it.
Yeah.
But that's right. It's a great question. Why are we not overall consistently aiming, whether you're a man or a woman, why are we not consistently aiming for blood sugars that are in the non-diabetic?
Right.
Why is that the case? Now, outside of this, there are some good reasons, things like older adults, hypoglycemia unawareness. There are some medical types of conditions or certain scenarios, let's call it, that could need range and or a higher range for safety kinds of reasons.
Yeah.
But the general population, it's a good thing to bring up because it's true. Why are we aiming for less than 180 after meals when really it should be lower?
And I brought it up because in my sort of peripheral understanding of this whole time that I've been in the diabetes space, I've always thought of it as people with pregnancy, people who are getting pregnant are somehow asked to do some superhuman thing with their health that's not even necessary. And it took me a while to realize that's not what we're really saying. What we're saying is that there's a lot of people who have type 1 diabetes, and we all have different access to different technology, insulins, all these different things. And so there's a blanket statement out there. Like if your A1C is, under this number, you'll probably have a really great chance of being okay. As it gets lower, your chances of problems get differently. Maybe they lessen. But then once in a while, someone will put out a report that says, "Oh, there's no benefit in having your A1C under this number for some reason."
Right.
And we've talked about it on here before, and I see that and I think, I don't believe that that's true. And I think that that's going to be one of those things that 10 years from now, someone's going to say, "Oh, there was a report 10 years ago that said this.
And it was wrong."
Yeah, but whoops. And, and I also think that it's an emotional idea. Like if someone has a 7, you don't want to make them feel like a failure because they're not 5.5, right?
Right.
Because they're not. But it doesn't mean that they should stop trying for the other thing. Not make themselves crazy or, like anything, but better goals. I don't know.
Right.
It just, it's like if I went out and ran a 300-yard dash today, I think I'd finish it in, I don't know, probably an hour and a half. And so, right? Now, that might be my personal best, but I saw in the Olympics, it can be done, in about
10 seconds or something.
Yeah, about 15 seconds. And so I can't just sit here and say, "Oh, I did the best ever," because that's my best, because it's not. And it's your health or your child's health. And you can't just, I think that one of the underlying concepts of this podcast is that you can't just say, "Oh, it's fine.
It's good," or "It's good enough."
I only spiked to 300 after pizza. I usually go to 400. That was a huge win for me.
That was better, right? And maybe that was a win. Maybe that was a win,
totally
But
better.
if it's totally better.
Try again. Right.
And that's that's a very good point to bring. I think targets in pregnancy are, in a way, they are tighter because we do have certain parameters, such as in the post-meal time period. The targets are at 1 hour post-meal. Mm-hmm. The goal is at 2 hours post-meal, it's less than 120.
Yep. And
really, if meals aren't in the picture, you should be averaging somewhere around, like the 65 to like 100-ish range. Mm-hmm. That's what you should be aiming for. Now, the person who's not pregnant, if they're sitting at 21, great. They might feel really good at 121. In pregnancy, that's the high end of really where we would want to hover long term. So there are some parameter differences, and I think it has to do also with everything that the mother is doing to her body.
Yeah.
Have impact on the developing baby then, right?
Keep in mind why that is too. 121 blood sugar. If you're a person, like we've been able to see my wife's blood sugar in the past, my wife's blood sugar sits at like 75 most of the time, right?
Yeah.
And so if that's what your normal is and you're 121, I'm going to tell you some quick math tells me that's 46 points higher than what your body would have done without diabetes, which is a significant difference. It's a significant concentration of glucose in your blood messing with the development of that baby. Correct. That's what or if you're not pregnant, messing with your life, so.
And as far as like messing with the baby, I think another piece to bring in is once the baby, I always find this concept really interesting that a pregnant woman who has diabetes, type 1 diabetes specifically, has a pancreas that's doing right. The betas are either almost completely dead or they're all gone, right? But they have and are growing this little person that has a working pancreas inside of its body.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's amazing just to think of like a developing baby to begin with, but then to think of all the little parts and pieces growing and working the way that they're supposed to in that like little being. It's amazing to me. So when you consider blood sugar in pregnancy as well, your baby has a functioning pancreas very early on.
Right.
And it starts to make insulin in response to what is telling its blood sugar.
Oh.
Right? So the flux of your blood sugar tells then how is kind of, it goes along with how much glucose or how much food gets funneled in to the baby. The higher your glucose levels are, the higher glucose levels will get. Now, babies' glucose levels, again, they're being controlled well within a normal non-diabetic target because that's what its body is doing. But the more the pancreas has to work to combat your high glucose levels, the more like swathed in glucose the to be continually. And that's why like later on, post-delivery, if the baby's body has been so used to pumping out excess insulin all the time, as soon as the baby is born, and you've heard about babies being born with really low blood sugar.
Yeah.
As soon as that umbilical cord is cut, the mother's food source to the baby, it is gone.
Right.
And if the baby has come into delivery with a pancreas that's spitting out excess insulin because the mother's glucose levels were so high, its blood sugars are going to plummet.
Interesting. Yeah.
So
that makes sense, obviously, but that's really interesting.
So that's another piece of like, we talk about the tight control in pregnancy. Tight is it's there for a different reason, really. And so the ranges and how long glucose should stay at that elevated like 140, then be back down really into the normal range. There's reason for that.
Yeah. It's funny. We all talk about it so academically, like, 140 in the first hour, 120 in the second hour, back down and stable. Until I wore a glucose monitor and watched my body do it, it really didn't mean as much to me as it did saying it out loud. See it. Right. Because my entire understanding of insulin is through Arden's perspective. Like I've never thought about it before about somebody else's ever once. And there's no lie. Your blood sugar just sits in the 80s, and then all of a sudden it pops up a little and comes back down and levels out. And maybe you see a protein rise or something from fat later. It comes back up a little bit, but boom, right back down again. I ate my face off and couldn't get my blood sugar to go above 145 one time, at 135.
Like 2 pieces of cake or something,
I just totally took in as much food as I could, and I couldn't get over 135. So, but how do we, it's interesting, right? Because this podcast works because we talk to people honestly about stuff like this, but most people's perception of how to talk to people is, well, don't make anyone feel bad. And I don't want anyone to feel bad. Like, I don't want someone to hear this and think, I can't do that. Because I think you can. I think that it's very possible that Jenny and I could have gotten on and said, this is a diabetes pro tip episode about pregnancy. Go back and listen to the other pro tips and then have sex. Yeah.
Right.
We'll see you next time. Like it maybe could have been that, really. And so if you're in the scenario right now where you're listening to this and you're like, oh, I can't do this, or I have a different kind of diabetes, you probably don't. A blood sugar that sits stable at 70, 75, 80, that's basal insulin. That's just getting your basal right. And so it's real doable. So if you've made it this far, you must really want to have a baby. And it really is doable. I really do say go back to episode 210, find the beginning of the pro tips, or go to diabetesprotip.com where they're all listed and listen through them. I think you could change your management. Now, here's the thing. You've been pregnant, like you said, a number of times with type 1. Is it more difficult, and by difficult, I mean intensive with your focus and paying attention to your diabetes while you're pregnant or while you're not pregnant? And what's different about it? Like, what are people going to find once they're pregnant? So I've got my 3 months where I'm doing great, but now all of a sudden there's a baby in there. What changes?
It's more intense, I think, because of the impact of the hormones once you are pregnant, right? So you knew what you were doing. You knew, let's say you had your list of 30 awesome foods that you had figured out, or 30 and you knew what to do for them and how to bolus, and you could knock out your 10-mile run, twice a week and whatever, you figured it out. Hormones in the picture change that.
Okay.
And so, and that sounds kind of scary, but it's kind of a roll with it, sort of.
Okay.
And if you've learned things, again, from the pro tips, you've learned that don't let it just sit there, fix it, right? Don't wait 6 days to see, is this really a trend? If you've got a high blood sugar in pregnancy, okay, one, it might be hormones. Great. Okay. But then let's get it down. In men tested that you know how to get your blood sugar down, use those tools.
Right.
You may need to use the tools in a more hyped up way, right? Let's say you always knew that an angled arrow up or a straight arrow up required an extra half a unit of insulin. Now, with pregnancy hormones in the mix, maybe it requires to offset that, because those pregnancy hormones cause some insulin resistance. And in early pregnancy, it's a very quick, noticeable rise in insulin need. The end of the first trimester, typically things dip off a little bit. They plateau as there's a transition where the pregnancy hormones are made, transitions from ovaries into your placenta. There's a little bit of a transition there. So you might run some lower blood sugars in late first trimester before second trimester starts. And this is where I kind of call it like, if you've ever been at a theme park and you get on the roller coaster and you're right at the bottom, just starts to get you going up, and you're up and you're up and you keep climbing and you keep climbing. That's from second trimester, or about like 18-ish plus weeks, that slow, steady climb in insulin resistance, thus requiring more
insulin
and more and over time. The heaviest resistance is definitely the third trimester, typically somewhere between about 30 to 32 weeks until about 36 weeks is the heaviest resistance. So you accommodate by making adjustments. And again, this is where that team to begin with should be a huge advantage to you, because during pregnancy brain or mommy brain is not a myth.
Yeah.
It is something that is there. You might get lost in data. And so having a team that's really, really good and willing and able frequently through pregnancy with adjustments, despite you making your own, you may need a second set or a third set of eyes looking at things and being able to say, that was great, but I think we could bump this a little bit more. We could change it a little bit more here. Oh, this looks like it's happening now.
Well, I was just, as you were speaking, there's this conundrum around more insulin. Like, my body needs more, all of a sudden give it more. And we call it insulin resistance. And I'm always resistant to call it insulin resistance. I'm always thinking of it as just more need. But how do you convey that to a person, right? How does a person who believes that their basal is 1 unit an hour, how can they make the leap to now believe it's 2 units an hour? Or that a meal that was 3 units is 6 units all of a sudden? Like, that's such a huge leap in your head. And I wonder if it wouldn't help people just to think of insulin resistance as magical carbs that just appeared inside of your body, right? Like, so, like instead of insulin resistance pushing your fasting blood sugar from 85 to 150, think of, well, how many carbs would have moved me that far?
Right.
And how much insulin would I have used for those carbs? So that's in there. There's a math equation of how much insulin do I need? But what I realize most about the podcast is that people need a way to think about it, right? They need a way that it makes sense to them, because otherwise they want an equation that's going to tell them, when I'm pregnant, I need this percentage more, or the food's going to need this much more. And I don't know that anyone's going to give you that answer the way you want it. So more.
And so I think it's more, but I think if, when you're talking about like the math, as you said, if you know that your typical fasting now in pregnancy has been like 78, 81, and now all of a sudden you're waking up 103, 110, that kind of range.
Yeah.
How much of an insulin adjustment is needed in that overnight basal then? And where did it go up, and what to adjust? Because again, if you've done your homework ahead of pregnancy, you have an idea of where things started. And as you changes, you're more attuned to them in pregnancy. You see things on a super highlighted level, let's call it. You're paying more and more and more attention. You asked, what's the difference between paying attention outside of pregnancy versus I think just the pregnancy itself drives a woman to think, I'm now caring for another little being that's growing, and I have the ability to let this baby develop really healthy from the get-go.
Right.
And I'm a big part of that, right? So you become really kind of like hyper on evaluating what's happening to your blood sugar. I mean, I looked at my Dexcom more often while I was pregnant. I was constantly like clicking to see, what was going on, where was it going, what was happening, because what able to see, is this normal, or have I gotten a new load of like pregnancy impact, and do I need to make a shift now? Oh, look, this is like day 2 that I've now had to correct my blood sugar with a little more after lunchtime. I need to obviously add more insulin to my bolus. I need to change my.
Did you have anxiety around that? Samantha mentioned in the episode that she sometimes felt like she was hurting the baby when her blood sugar would get high. And she said it was hard to deal with sometimes.
And I think that's I would say 95% of the women that I work with, their pregnancy, that's at least once it's mentioned, well, my goodness, my blood sugar. Again, we had like a baby shower, and I had like a bite of a cupcake, and my blood sugar was 201, or,
right.
I got it down really, right away.
They're
I'm
apologizing to you.
I'm like, okay, that's okay. And they're,
right.
They're very, I think the worry really is, one, they need to voice it because it was concerning.
Yeah.
And 2, of worrying about that baby. Did that really high blood sugar for 1 hour cause my baby to now have 3 eyeballs to now weigh 12 pounds? No,
right.
It's more understanding that the consistent lengthy high blood sugars, that's problematic.
Right.
On off. I mean, was my blood sugar sitting at 83 the entire pregnancy, this like flat, beautiful? I actually go back to my Dexcom records from that time because I printed them out. And I have them in like my pregnancy file.
We're going to just let everybody take a second to say to themselves personally, whether they're doing chores at the house, or working out, or you're grocery shopping, to go, I knew Jenny had her Dexcom graphs from her pregnancy.
Well, they're good. They're reference for me as I work with people. And I was really glad having done that my first pregnancy, because we knew that we wanted more kids.
Yeah.
And I wanted to have a reference to be able to say, so once you get through a first pregnancy and you get an idea, I needed more around 20 weeks. I needed more again in basal and in bolus, and I needed to lengthen my pre-bolus. That's another big one that shifts through pregnancy. You might, pre-pregnancy, you might do 15, 20 weeks. Things are stable. That works really great. Once you're pregnant, as you get more pregnant, the time of pre-bolus gets longer and longer and longer. So by about mid-pregnancy, you should be at a 30-minute pre-bolus for most meals.
How much of what's happening to a pregnant person is in regards to their insulin use is that they're pregnant, that they're cooking a little person inside of them. They've got a bunch of hormones going on. And by the way, all of you have to be so impressed that I talk about this stuff so much and have never told that joke from the 80s. How do you make a hormone? I keep it inside every time I hear it, just so you know. And so how much of this has to do with that? And how much does it have to do with gaining weight too? Is that a part of it? So like aside of the diabetes piece, or aside of the pregnancy piece, you are gaining weight as well, right? Gaining
weight, and you should be gaining weight, and that is a very big piece of it. Yeah. Yes, and healthy weight gain. If you're at a really good target, happy, healthy weight prior to pregnancy, you could gain somewhere between 20 to 30, 25 to 35.
Okay.
In pregnancy, that would be considered normal. You have to expect, or I guess you have to understand, where does that weight come from? Because in both of my pregnancies, my first pregnancy, I think it was 26 pounds. My second pregnancy, I gained 21 pounds. And you have to you have an 8-pound baby. That's like a third to maybe half of your week, depending, that's a big chunk of that already now, like put on the floor, plopped out after you've delivered, floor, right? Hopefully not the floor, but right. It's like not on you anymore, right? And then you have to expect development for lactation. You have a placenta, you have all the amniotic fluid, your fluid levels in your body double through pregnancy. That's why a lot of women experience swelling and whatnot in their legs by the end of the day in late stages of pregnancy. Your blood volume increases to pump all of that extra blood through you, tissue and the baby. So you've got a lot of gain that disappears literally once you deliver the baby.
Right.
So really women end up, you hear people complaining, oh, this last 5 pounds, I can't seem to get rid of it after pregnancy. That's really, it is fat gain.
Yeah.
Most women gain somewhere to 7 pounds of fat gain through pregnancy. And it's normal. Your body should be doing that because if you plan to nurse or breastfeed it, your child, your body needs a reserve. So it's packing things away so you can make plenty milk to supply this like never empty baby.
Yeah. I was going to show off.
They're hungry all the time.
I was about to show off and say that was for breastfeeding, but then you beat me to it. I was like, I knew something finally. No, it's fine.
Did.
Don't worry.
Yeah,
but I can't prove it now, so it doesn't matter.
And typically, as long as you nurse, most women are going to retain about that. Once nursing is done, depending on how long you plan to nurse, usually as long as you've returned to your normal activity and you haven't been eating bonbons crazy just because you want to, typically that weight does come off once you're through nursing.
Okay. All right. So we've gotten through the pregnancy. Things have gone well. The day of the delivery comes, please talk to your doctors well ahead of hand and understand that just speaking to your doctors doesn't mean that the nurse at the hospital is going to know that you're taking care of your blood sugar during your delivery, right?
Correct.
And it's going to, if you've been doing such a good job this far, it'd be really weird to hand it off to somebody in the last 50 yards when you're like, I can see the end. Now you take care of my blood sugar. So, if you have a spouse or a family member that you can, teach how to help you
we'll be there with you.
Right. In case something gets funky and they end up putting you out or something like that. I guess, obviously, if they go to a C-section, you're going to get handled like a surgery case then too. But if you're just having a regular vaginal birth, you should be able to manage your blood sugar through that time pretty well.
And potentially even a C-section,
Really? Okay.
Really. And I think this is where protocol, like you said initially, it's really important to have this talk with your team much sooner than delivery could possibly happen.
Yeah.
I mean, there are always certain instances, delivery at like 28 weeks or 30 weeks or whatever. I mean, those are really, it's not often. And that's a very skill of management, right? But for the most part, with women that I work with through pregnancy, we establish and detail a labor and delivery plan.
Okay.
And it goes through, these are the expectations of glucose management. This is where you should target through delivery. This is how much insulin adjustment you could expect to need to make. And again, every woman responds to laboring and delivery a little bit differently. Some women's needs with the active nature of laboring, some women's needs go down by 50%. Great, use a temp basal decrease. Some women's needs go up a little bit with the stress of all of the contractions and everything. Great, so you might need little nudge kind of boluses of insulin in order to get a little bit right? A little bit extra. Whenever you're correcting in delivery, our recommendation is typically about 50% of what your pump is recommending to correct a blood sugar while you're laboring.
Okay.
Because again, you're active. I mean, it's not like you're out running a marathon, but a pregnancy can take long, or a delivery can take a lot longer than a marathon takes a person, right? So you can expect that now is going to get active pretty quick, and it's going to have a faster impact on your blood sugar, right? So those are some of the things that we highlight. We also have a pattern established in the care plan so that the doctors know where your rates are, what your sensitivity is going in delivery.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also a postpartum part of the delivery plan that notes now insulin needs are decreased considerably. This is what your postpartum pattern should look like. A lot of the women I work with take it into their OB team. They get it signed off. It becomes part of their medical record. And once they go into the hospital, that's the plan of care. The nurses know the targets. They don't have to continue to explain it over and over and over and over to all of the nurses as they're rotating through their 8 to 12-hour shifts.
Yeah. That's Samantha brought that up too, that the first nursing staff was great after the pregnancy. And then when they switched over, the next group didn't know what the first group knew. And then now you're explaining about your blood sugars and that all gets, and you've just had a baby. She said she was wasted from having the baby and the whole thing. Okay. So I have a couple more questions and I know we're running up on time a little bit.
Oh, we're good. We're good.
Okay. Make the baby comes out, everybody comes to the hospital. They're like, oh my God, the baby, you made a baby. It's great. You see your friends of yours who you're like, oh my God, they shouldn't even be near kids. Somehow you let them hold your baby. If you're younger, trust me, that will happen. One of your 25 or 30-year-old friends is going to be holding them. And you're like, that's probably a mistake letting Jimmy near the baby. And, so that all happens. You're home now. Now you've got to take care of a baby.
Yeah.
I see a lot of people say, well, it's hard to take care of the baby and my blood sugar the way I was taking care of it before. But did you find, I'm using you as an example here because you're very good at handling your blood sugar. Did you have trouble after you had a baby keeping care of yourself?
I think, this is where, again, planning your care team kind of thing comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
And while your mom, your aunt, your best friend, your uncle's brother who isn't really your uncle, but is a good friend that you, whatever it is, whoever's going to hopefully be there, anyone post-delivery that you trust, not Jimmy, who
apparently
might drop
we
the
can't
baby.
even give the baby to. No.
I guess we can't give the baby to him. But somebody you're going to trust to be there once you come home from the hospital.
Yeah.
That is a really, and something for at least a week, maybe even 2 weeks, for someone to really be there to help with things. Because one, delivery in and of itself it's a labor.
Yeah.
That's why they call it labor, right? It's work. You may, with a vaginal delivery, you may not be in the hospital for very long. If you have a C-section delivery, C-sections typically are about a 3 to 4 night stay. But it depends on healing and how things are going and all of that kind of stuff, right? But definitely when you get home, it's harder because you're now not taking care of just you and diabetes. Now it's like you've got a second child, even though if this is your first real child.
Right.
I always consider diabetes kind of like a toddler that never really grows up, like constantly sort of like caring for it. So it's almost like this first child diabetes gets pushed off in the corner and you're like, yeah, you're just going to have to sit there for a bit because mommy's got to take care of this.
He's be fine. He can do his homework by himself.
He's going to be fine.
Yeah, it'll be all right.
That's right. Right. So, some things to kind of, along with that care person there beyond your spouse or your significant other, somebody else that can be there so you can focus a little bit, because in that time period, especially the first month, things will change considerably with insulin sensitivity, especially if you're nursing.
Okay.
There are a lot of changes that will take place, and blood sugars are going to look a little bit more roller coaster than we want.
How important are blood sugars to the breastfeeding process? Does that impact the milk at all?
So there's a lot of thought around it, a lot of research that's sort of like a 50-50. One of the big things is high blood sugars can actually impact good lactation.
Okay.
So if you leave your blood sugars sitting high, one, as we've talked previous episodes about hydration, if your blood sugars are sitting high, you are not well hydrated.
Milk
you
is
are
liquid.
And milk is liquid.
I figured that out.
Not only do you have more coming out as you're nursing, your blood sugars are high, drinking enough.
Oh, I see.
So, right?
Okay.
So hydration is really, really an important part of not only the blood sugar, but also continuing to be able to supply enough liquid that's going to get sucked out of your body, essentially,
and
right?
Keep in mind, too, if you've never had a baby before, they don't sleep the way real people sleep. So there's a tired factor that is really hard to put into words. It's not easy. And so there's a lot going on. I mean, listen, we've gotten this far. I should probably tell you, having kids is a huge mistake. You shouldn't.
No.
No. What do you mean?
No.
No, I don't mean that. Having them's great. It's getting them and taking care of them and keeping them alive and being, good to them and teaching them things. All that is a horror show. But the kid itself is lovely. Like when you just see it walk through the room, you're like, oh, look, the kid. That's
my
nice.
Child.
Yeah.
Yay.
In that moment, you don't think about when they're yelling at you when they're 8, or that you paid a guy who was probably homeless to be Spider-Man at a 3rd birthday party or something like that. Like those are the things, they want you to have a dog, and then you get a dog because you're like, oh, the kid should grow up with a dog. And then it's 6:30 in the morning. Everyone's asleep but you, and you're outside with a damn dog. I'm saying kids are great. A lot of what goes with it is hard.
It's hard.
And especially right after you have the baby.
Is hard, especially if, again, it's your first pregnancy.
Yeah.
It's a harder time. And this is, again, where help comes in the form of also like pre-planning for the post-delivery time period. We a number of like soups and things that I could put in the freezer that were easy to pull out. I knew the content of them because I knew what was in them. I either made them or my mom made them, and I froze them. It made it a heck of a lot easier. Also, some of those foods that are definite known foods and how you react to them can be a huge help in the aftermath. So it's not more struggle as you're already managing nursing a child, putting a child to sleep, learning how to not like have poop all over the place as you change them.
And you could experience postpartum depression, which is incredibly common. There's a lot that could happen. And by the way, a lot of guys will eventually turn into good fathers, but they don't have a nature provided switch. Like I'm telling you, you're going to have a baby and be like, this is the most important thing in the world. I watched what happened to my wife. She almost didn't even care that I was alive when the baby came out. She was like, the baby's here and that guy, it was. If you're, lucky, you're going to get a great connection and you're going to feel that desire to take very good care. It takes guys longer to figure out how to be fathers than it takes women to figure out how to be mothers, generally speaking. Even if you've got a good guy, even if you're listening right now, and you're like, no, my guy's a good guy. Listen, I'm a good guy. It took me like 2 years to figure out how to be a good dad, right? Because you have to watch it and go, oh, okay, this is what I think they want, but this is what they actually need. There's a difference in there. I still struggle with to this day. I'll probably be struggling with it on my deathbed. I'll be 80 years old, just drifting off, and I'll hear someone in my family go, he did that wrong. So there's that too. There's a lot that's going to happen to you when you have a baby, and you're going to have diabetes too. And it would be very much my hope that you don't take all this wonderful stuff that you've learned pre-planning for your pregnancy, through your delivery, and just do that very human thing of going, that baby's more important than I am, and so I'll let my stuff wait.
I think who also has type 1, she had a son prior to our first son. And she gave me some really good advice and said, you know what? If in turn, we were talking about like low blood sugars around nursing, right? And she was like, you know what? If low and the baby is screaming, but the baby is safe, not sitting like on the edge of the counter waiting to fall off, right? But like juggling safe, knives. Fine. I am important to take care of myself. It's important that I take care of myself. Right. I'm important too. I have to manage my high blood sugar. And the baby screaming, it's okay. Yeah. The baby's going to be okay screaming, really. You're not going to let him scream for like 3 hours. But in the case of 5-10 minutes while you are taking care of you, treating a low blood sugar, or even just for your meal before you actually sit down to eat it, that's another piece that we talk a lot about pre-bolusing and the timing in this podcast. And that's a piece that often goes out the window, because depending on what your schedule is like, what your significant other's schedule is like, you may at times be holding your maternity leave with the baby.
Yeah. There's part of me that believes that we should be making a sign and selling it through the podcast that just says, it's a real homey. You know how like you see those beautiful signs in people's kitchens? It's like the cook is blah, blah, blah. Or something. There should just be one that says pre-bolus hung in people's homes so that it gets drilled into your head over and over again. Because it's the easiest thing to mess up, like to forget, you know. I did it this morning. This morning, we got back from the blood draw and Arden's like, I'm going to have eggs and turkey bacon and toast. And I was like, does that mean I'm making it for you? And she's like, yeah. So I'm thinking, well, I have an hour till Jenny and I record and I can get this done by then. And I started focusing on getting it finished. And then I turned to her and handed her a plate and thought, oh, I didn't give her any insulin. Damn it.
And of course she didn't think of it either.
Nobody
right?
thought of it. No, we had gotten up super early to go to this blood draw place and, you know, like all this stuff. So I said to her, we're going to bolus now and please eat the toast last. That was like the best I could come up with, you know, in the moment. And we ended up having to use an extra unit to overcome that.
To offset.
Right.
Yeah.
So, okay. Did we miss anything? Is there something in the back of your head burning?
I'm trying to think of, I guess the one last thing along with the post is definitely stay connected to your care team.
Okay.
You know, because that's, as you mentioned already, there is potential for postpartum. There's a difference between just being a little bit like down in the aftermath of delivery and true, like you crawl in bed and you're like, I don't to do anything else.
Right.
I will nurse the baby, but then the baby goes over here. It's almost like it's a disconnect that happens in true postpartum depression.
Yeah.
And so staying connected to your care team is really, really important. Making sure you have those postpartum follow-ups kind of scheduled to leave the hospital. It's really, really important. Maybe staying connected with your diabetes educator or your endocrine doctor, whoever was also a really good advantage through pregnancy. Stay connected with them so that, you know, they can even, you know, nudge you maybe to say, hey, you know, can you just pop in and upload it and I can take a peek and I can make some recommendations for you.
Yeah, let somebody help you.
Let somebody help you, really.
And if
I think, go ahead.
If you think it can't happen to you, my wife and I, we were just talking about this recently. She said for the first 2 weeks after our son was born, she had no feeling at all about having a baby. Like she just felt like we brought home a lamp. You know, like it really, she's just like, I don't know if I like this thing or not. You plug it in over there, leave it. Well, we'll see how it goes. Right. And she said that all of a sudden one day, a couple of weeks in, I was at work and she said she just was holding Cole and just started crying. She's like, the baby's the most important thing. Like it all hit her at once. It was almost like you expect it to happen when you need it, but it didn't happen to her right away. And then she had that like, oh my God, I have a baby and I don't care. Like or not even not care, but like there hasn't been this ramping up connection immediately, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's a rabbit hole people could fall down, especially if you've been depressed in the past or, you know, something like that.
And especially with another condition to manage like diabetes.
Yeah.
There's more to manage than just connecting with this new little person.
Yeah.
So,
stay connected to somebody that can walk you through it. And if you're feeling that way, have to tell somebody. Like, don't hide it. Just tell somebody.
Just tell somebody. Right.
And I should say here as we finish up, if anybody wanted to buy a book about pregnancy with type 1 diabetes, should they buy one called Pregnancy with Type 1 Diabetes, Your Month-to-Month Guide to Blood Sugar Management, available on Amazon and written by Ginger Vieira and Jennifer Smith, CDE? Oh, should they? Oh, okay.
Yes, they should. Absolutely. I think the farthest I've heard that somebody's purchased our book is Bali.
Bali?
Or Bali, yes.
Oh, you said Bali. I was like,
I meant Bali, yes.
Did you mean the place in Vegas where I can lose my money in a slot
not
machine?
Bali.
No, not Bali's?
Bali.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yes.
So there's someone in Bali right now, has a little baby, a Bali baby.
Not yet. She's pregnant.
Oh, look at that. All right. Well, all I know is Ginger's been on the show before. You obviously know Jenny. The book's only $12. It definitely is worth your while.
And it goes through everything, kind of in a much more broad what we've touched on kind of in each of the sections of planning, pregnancy, whatnot. It's a good book. I'm glad that we did it.
I want to thank Ascensia Diabetes for sponsoring the Remastered Diabetes Pro Tip series. Don't forget, you can get a free Contour Next Gen Starter Kit at contournext.com/juicebox free meter. While supplies last, U.S. residents only. If you're enjoying the remastered episodes of the Diabetes Pro Tip series from the Juicebox Podcast, you have Touched by Type 1 to thank. TouchedByType1.org is a proud sponsor of the remastering of the Diabetes Pro Tip series. Learn more about them at touchedbytype1.org. A huge thank you to one of today's sponsors, Gvoke Glucagon. Find out more about Gvoke HypoPen at gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. You spell that GVOKEGLUCAGON.com/juicebox. If you're living with diabetes or are the caregiver of someone who is, and you're looking for an online community of supportive people who understand, check out the Juicebox Podcast private Facebook group, Juicebox Podcast Type 1 Diabetes. There are over 41,000 active members, and we add 300 new members every week. There is a conversation happening right now that would interest you, inform you, or give you the opportunity to share something that you've learned. Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes on Facebook. And it's not just for Type 1s. Any kind of diabetes, any way you're connected to it, you are invited to join this absolutely free and welcoming community. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Now, listen, there's 26 episodes in this series. You might not know what each of them are. I'm going to tell you now. Episode 1000 is called Newly Diagnosed or Starting Over. Episode 1001, all about MDI. 1002, all about insulin. 1003 is called Pre-Bolus. Episode 1004, Temp Basal. 1005, Insulin Pumping. 1006, Mastering a CGM. 1007, Bump and Nudge. 1008, The Perfect Bolus. 1009, Variables. 1010, Setting Basal Insulin. 1011, Exercise. 1012, Fat and Protein. 1013, Insulin Injury and Surgery. 1014, Glucagon and Low BGs. In episode 1015, Jenny and I talk about emergency room protocols. In 1016, Long-Term Health. 1017, Bump and Nudge Part 2. In episode 1018, Pregnancy. 1019, Explaining Type 1. 1020, Glycemic Index and Load. 1021, Postpartum. 1022, Weight Loss. 1023, Honeymoon. 1024, Female Hormones. And in episode 1025, we talk about transitioning from MDI to pumping. Before I go, I'd like to share 2 reviews with you of the Diabetes Pro Tip series, one from an adult and one from a caregiver. I learned so much from the Pro Tip series when our son was diagnosed last summer. It really helped get me through those first few very tough weeks. It wasn't just your explanations of how it all works, which were way better than anything our diabetes educator told us, but something about the way you and Jenny presented everything, even the scary stuff, that reassured me that we could figure out how to deal with this and to teach our son how to deal with it too. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience with us. This podcast is a game changer. 25 years as a type 1 diabetic, and only now am I learning some of the basics. Scott brings useful information and presents it in digestible ways. Learning that pre-bolus doesn't just mean bolus before you eat, but means timing your insulin so that it is active as the carbs become active, took me already from a decent 6.5 A1C down to a 5.6 in the past 8 months. I've never met Scott, but after listening to hundreds of episodes and joining him in his Facebook group, I consider him a friend. Listening to this podcast and applying it has been the best thing I have done for my health since diagnosis. I genuinely hope that the Diabetes Pro Tip series is valuable for you and your family. If it is, find me in the private Facebook group and say hello. If you're enjoying the Juicebox Podcast, please share it with a friend, a neighbor, your physician, or someone else who you know that might also benefit from the podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back very soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast. Jenny Smith holds a bachelor's degree in human nutrition and biology from the University of Wisconsin. She is a registered and licensed dietitian, a certified diabetes educator, and a certified trainer on most makes and models of insulin pumps and continuous glucose monitoring systems. She's also had type 1 diabetes for over 35 years, and she works at integrateddiabetes.com. If you're interested in hiring Jenny, you can learn more about her at that link.